in the development and evaluation of these programs. Unlike conventional military operations, the identities of many individuals involved in Operation Sea-Spray were never publicly disclosed. The program remained classified, and much of its planning and execution was hidden from public view for decades. The United States biological weapons program began during World War II and expanded quickly in the years that followed. Military leaders feared that biological warfare could one day be used against American cities, and they began testing how such an attack might work. In 1949, scientists carried out a vulnerability test inside the Pentagon, releasing harmless bacteria to see how airborne organisms could spread through a large building. But testing inside a building was not enough. Military planners needed to know what would happen if an entire city was exposed. In late September 1950, a U.S. Navy minesweeper quietly took position just off the coast of San Francisco. From the deck, the sailors began releasing aerosolized bacteria into the air. The organisms used in the test were Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii. Both were believed to be harmless and easy for researchers to track. As the bacteria were released, they formed an invisible cloud that drifted toward the shoreline. Millions of people lived in the path of that cloud. They went to work, rode streetcars, and walked through the fog, unaware that a military experiment was unfolding around them. Military scientists believed the test posed no danger. Their objective was to measure how biological agents would disperse across a real urban environment. Carried by coastal winds and concealed by San Francisco's fog, the bacteria spread into the city exactly as planners intended. The military established 43 monitoring stations throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Their purpose was to track the movement and concentration of the bacterial cloud as it passed over the city. What they found surprised them. The bacteria spread farther and more efficiently than expected. It moved through neighborhoods, across downtown streets, and into surrounding suburbs. Later analysis concluded that a large portion of the city's population had been exposed. Most residents inhaled the bacteria without even knowing it. From a military perspective, the operation had achieved its objective. Researchers had gathered real-world data on how a biological agent could spread through a major American city. But within weeks, doctors began to notice something unusual. At Stanford University Hospital, physicians identified a cluster of infections caused by Serratia marcescens, the same organism used in the test. The infections were rare and unexpected. On October 11, 1950, 11 patients had been infected. 10 recovered. Edward J. Nevin did not. Nevin had recently undergone prostate surgery, which may have made him more vulnerable to infection. Still, the appearance of Serratia marcescens in hospitalized patients raised serious questions. The bacteria had not commonly been associated with human illness at the time. Nevin's family later filed a lawsuit against the United States government, believing his infection may have been connected to Operation Sea-Spray. The case was ultimately dismissed, and no direct legal responsibility was established. Was his death simply a coincidence or a consequence of the test? For more than 2 decades, the public knew nothing about Operation Sea-Spray. The test remained classified, and no announcement was ever made. At the time, military scientists believed the organisms used in the experiment were safe. Bacillus globigii, often labeled BG in military records and now commonly referred to as Bacillus atrophaeus, was later found capable of causing infections under certain conditions, particularly in individuals with weakened immune systems. The government never formally acknowledged a direct connection between Operation Sea-Spray and Edward Nevin's death, and no official determination linked the experiment to his infection. For years, the operation remained buried within military records. Outside of a small number of military and research personnel, its existence was unknown to the public. The residents of San Francisco who had been exposed were never informed that the test had taken place. That began to change in the 1970s when congressional investigations and growing public scrutiny forced the military to disclose previously classified biological warfare testing programs. As documents were declassified, Operation Sea-Spray was finally revealed. What emerged showed that the San Francisco test had been part of a much larger effort that had remained hidden for decades. Between 1949 and 1969, the U.S. military conducted open-air biological simulations over populated areas across the United States. These tests were designed to measure how airborne agents might disperse through real urban environments, including cities, transportation systems, and coastal regions. Operation Sea-Spray was one of the largest of these operations, exposing a major American population center to a military experiment conducted without public awareness. Much of the program operated under strict secrecy, information was compartmentalized, and many of the personnel involved were never publicly identified. Even senior government officials outside the immediate chain of command were not fully informed. The extent of what civilian leadership, including President Harry S. Truman, knew about specific tests has remained a subject of historical debate. The revelations raised difficult questions, especially in light of recent history. Only a few years earlier, the Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes trials had prosecuted officials for conducting medical and scientific experiments on human subjects without consent. These trials helped establish new international standards, including principles later reflected in the Geneva Conventions and broader human rights agreements. Operation Sea-Spray emerged in the shadow of those standards, becoming one of the most controversial examples of Cold War biological testing conducted on American soil. Today, Operation Sea-Spray is frequently cited as an ethical failure of the early Cold War era. Critics have focused on the absence of informed consent, the lack of public notification, and the uncertainty surrounding potential long-term health effects. At the time, military officials maintained that the bacteria used in the test were harmless, and they believed the experiment posed little risk to the general population. Subsequent medical research showed that Serratia marcescens is capable of causing infections, particularly in individuals with compromised immune systems or underlying health conditions. Although most healthy residents experienced no documented long-term consequences, the case became a lasting example in debates over government transparency and the limits of human experimentation during periods of national security secrecy. Historians generally agree on several conclusions. The test demonstrated how efficiently airborne microbes could disperse across a major urban center. It also revealed how little the public knew about classified military programs being conducted in their own communities. What remains uncertain is the full scope of exposure and whether additional health effects were ever properly identified. The precise human impact may never be known. Public awareness of Operation Sea-Spray did not emerge on its own. In the 1970s, Senator Frank Church led a series of congressional investigations into intelligence and military abuses. The Church Committee uncovered numerous secret government operations, including previously undisclosed biological warfare tests conducted on American soil. Operation Sea-Spray became part of the broader reckoning, forcing a national conversation about the boundaries of government power. The Church Committee's investigations brought new attention to the individuals and institutions behind America's biological warfare programs. As records were examined, investigators began to identify key figures who had played roles in shaping U.S. biological research and policy during and after World War II. These revelations helped establish how extensive the program had been and how long it had operated in secrecy. George W. Merck, who led the President's Advisory Committee on Biological Warfare in the late 1940s, played a central role in establishing the policies and infrastructure of the United States Biological Weapons Program during its formative years. Stanley Lovell, Scientific Director of the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, was also involved in developing unconventional weapons and supporting early biological research. Although neither man was publicly identified as directing Operation Sea-Spray itself, their leadership helped build the institutional and scientific foundation that made such testing possible. In the early Cold War period, American officials also made controversial decisions to recruit or utilize scientific expertise connected to foreign biological warfare programs, reflecting the strategic priority placed on acquiring knowledge and maintaining parity with rival powers.